Another live chat with Polar Bears International. We are coming to you live from our EV Tundra Buggy 1 on the shores of Hudson Bay. We have been surrounded by polar bears all morning. There's been a mom with a cub, there's males all around us, there's some out behind us right now and one sleeping in the bushes. So we'll keep showing you live polar bears as we go all throughout our broadcast today, which will be about 1 hour. Please do send us your questions if you have any questions for our panelists today, and I bet you'll have quite a few. Put them in the chat wherever you're watching. So YouTube, Facebook, you can also email questions at pbears.org. We've got some pretty special guests here with us today who know a lot about bears. So if you've got questions about polar bears, but also black bears or brown bears or sloth bears, do let us know. So I'm Elisa McCall with Polar Bears International, and I will get our panelists to give themselves each a pretty good introduction so you know who we're talking to. And I'll start with our guest on my left, Marty.
Hi, my name is Martin Obard. I'm an emeritus research scientist with the Ontario Minister of Natural Resources. I've studied black bears and polar bears in Ontario for about 30 years until I retired back in 2016.
Thanks, Marty. And Jeff.
My name's Jeff York. I'm the Senior Director of Science and Policy at Polar Bears International. I've been working on polar bear issues for 27 years, and that was spread across Alaska, Russia, Canada, and Norway.
Great. And Tom.
Tom Smith. I'm a professor of wildlife sciences at Brigham Young University. I've been working on bears for about 33 years, polar bears for about 20 or so, and currently also study black, brown, and sloth bears, so 4 of the 8 species.
All right, so for any bear lovers out there, this is a wonderful panel if you've got any questions. The theme today is living with bears and bear safety when you're in bear country, so we are going to speak a little bit about deterrence and safety and all that good stuff, but first we want to start out with a little bit of context. So our viewers that have been with us for a long time know this, but new viewers might not know why there are polar bears outside us right now. Polar bears have adapted to live on the sea ice in the Arctic, and they hunt seals, and that's their main prey. But at this time of the year where we are, near Churchill, Manitoba, on the shores of Hudson Bay, there's no sea ice. So Hudson Bay has ice all winter and no ice in the summer. We're of course heading into winter, so the bears are starting to gather in this area in preparation for that sea ice freezing up soon. They know that soon the ice will come and soon they can go hunt seals. But right now they're bored. They haven't really eaten very well for months, and they're just hanging out, so we get to be here and we get to watch them. Jeff, what is the status of sea ice on Hudson Bay? People are asking, are we seeing any ice out here? Where is it? When will it come?
Sure. Well, we are actually sitting on the beach. It's just off to our left here, and there's no ice out there. The bay is mostly wide open. We're just starting to see the very faintest formation of landfast ice up in the north in Fox Basin, but the totality of Hudson Bay is still ice-free.
Right, which means these bears are still on land. So we are hoping for sea ice soon. We will keep live streaming our cameras as long as the bears are here. So as much as we love seeing them, we do hope they can get out there and eat soon. So I wanted to start our kind of core subject today by throwing it over to Tom Smith. And he's been speaking with us for this last week, and I think it's so fascinating, talking a bit about the evolutionary history of different bear species and how that can inform us about the behaviors that they have.
Thank you. I've been studying human-bear conflict for, since the mid-90s, and tried to come up with the what happens when brown bears are surprised or polar bears are attracted to a settlement, or, what the what's of it. But eventually all of us are most capable of projecting and learning when we understand the why. So, what questions tell us about something very specific, but like a bear in Banff that breaks into a cabin or something. But the why questions help us to understand how they think and how they would, from an evolutionary perspective, settle, food deficits or try to decide whether they're going to fight or not fight. So in taking that to the 8 species of bears, something that really hadn't been done as a whole, I and my colleagues looked at why panda bears are never involved in incidents, brown bears are often involved in incidents, and that kind of thing, and where polar bears sit in there and why they act the way they do. And one of the broad splits of the data is you can ask, basically we have two types of interactions with humans. You have predatory, where the bear sees the human as food and tries to take them as a food item. And then you have what we call defensive aggressive, which means that they're attacking the person because they perceive them as a threat. Those are the two broad groups. There's some finer details. But for instance, on predatory, we need only ask of the 8 species which ones are carnivorous and which aren't. So when you do that, you automatically see the panda bears and sun bears and the, I'm trying to think who else, but those two anyway, don't eat any meat. So they're not going to be ever predatory on human. They also have to be large enough to take a human, and that excludes the sun bear because it's very small. So you can kind of work your way through the data that way. When you look at then defensive aggressive, we look at polars and brown bears, Asiatic black bears, American black bears, for instance, and those bears have different evolutionary histories. So for instance, a black bear that evolved in the forests of the North America, those bears had the option of climbing a tree or of disappearing into the dark underbrush, hence their black color. That's a cryptic adaptation to allow them to melt into the background. And that's what they do. You can even have somebody interact with a mother and cubs and she'll just take off. That is not the case because the cubs can climb a tree and she can just disappear. With a brown bear, as we all know, or a grizzly bear, that's not the case. And why? Because they evolved in a place where hiding or running, going up a tree was not an option, the treeless tundra. So in those cases, those bears evolved responses. The best defense is a good offense. Hence, they charge and they take out the perceived threat. Anyway, we could go through all 8, and I've done that, but it is helpful to kind of understand that with these bears, for instance, the sloth bear, which you mentioned of India, very, very aggressive, smallish bear, 125 kilograms, not that big, but in their world, their formidable, predator is a tiger. Running from the tiger doesn't work. Standing still doesn't work. So they have this lightning quick, aggressive charge, and that works. But they also don't eat any meat. So when they mix it up with humans, it's never about predation. It's always about startling them. And as a biologist, that's a very easy message then. Don't scare these bears. So you do things to telegraph your presence anyway. That's the kind of research I've been doing lately, and it's helped me understand these animals a little better.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think that's a great way to think about bears. I know a lot of our viewers watch as many bear cams as they can. So if you've again have any questions about any of these bears, do let us know. And then Marty, I wanted to ask you. You've been speaking with us a bit about thinking about top down and bottom up impacts when it comes to bears. Maybe you could explain a little bit of what that means.
Sure. I think one of the things that many people perhaps don't fully understand when we're talking about human-bear conflict is the tremendous pressure that various ecological processes have on bear population dynamics and behavior and so on, but also on human-bear conflict. So with animals like black bears or grizzly bears, ecologists talk about bottom-up processes. So variation in their natural food has a tremendous effect on survival, reproduction, and so on, but also on human-bear conflict. So if natural foods fail, then conflicts between bears and people escalate dramatically. In the opposite kind of thing, where you have top-down pressures, what you're talking about is where a predator might have effect on prey. For example, Tom's example of tigers and sloth bears, there's an effect there on bears. That's a top-down process. But for polar bears, we also think about bottom-up processes. And what are those? Well, they're largely the polar bear's ability to access its prey. And that's determined by the amount of time that a bear has on the ice and the number of seals that are around, et cetera, et cetera. So for polar bears, bottom-up processes are quite different from animals like black bears and grizzly bears, but they're still there, and they're quite dramatic.
Yeah, that's really good to keep in mind. We get asked this question a lot about how many seals does a polar bear actually need? How often do they eat? Kids ask, do they eat 3 seals a day? Kind of, is there an average amount that polar bears need when it comes to seals?
So many years ago, Ian Sterling and Neil Swartzland published a paper looking at the energy content of a average seal, and they estimated, I think it was 40 adult seal equivalents for a year. So about one a week when they're on more than one a week when they're on the ice. About 1 1/3, I think, a week while they're on the ice, equivalent of an adult. Now, much of the weight gain that polar bears go through during their hyperphagic period in the spring is based on ring seal pups and bearded seal pups. So it would be ultimately a lot more than 40 individual seals, but with the equivalent of 40 adults in energy content.
Right, so that's a good amount of seals. And of course, again, when they're on land like this, they really don't have access to seals. I think there was a seal kill out here maybe a few days ago or last week that the cameras caught a bit of. That does happen, but it's not something that's consistent. I think you also might have seen our clip from last week where there was a polar bear swimming just out here and then a seal following it in the water, knowing there was no problem, that polar bear wasn't going to be able to get it. Polar bears really need that ice to give them the advantage to hunt seals for the most part. So when they're on land, they really are mostly hungry, and they're losing about 1 kilogram of body weight a day. And having Churchill here, which has this gathering of polar bears, makes it the most amazing place to examine what works and what doesn't work when it comes to human-polar bear coexistence. So we can test tools here, we can try new things, and Polar Bears International has been quite involved with human-polar bear coexistence in this region. So Jeff, I was hoping you could talk a little bit, maybe start with polar bears a bit broadly across the Arctic and then drill down into what Polar Bears International is doing.
Sure. So around the Arctic, what we're seeing as habitat changes, sea ice is pulling back in many places, is that bears are spending longer times ashore in more places, and sometimes in places where there's no history of them occurring. So as they spend more time on shore, some of those bears are wandering inland in some cases, or even drifting by ice movement to countries that they don't typically occur in at all, in terms of places like Iceland there. And so at the same time, we're seeing a lot more human activity in the Arctic. As that ice pulls back, a new ocean is essentially available in different areas, and so we're getting in there with tourism, we're getting in there with oil and gas and mining, and we're getting in there with research in some cases too. So more human activity, more bears where they're accessible to people. We're just concerned that that could lead to more negative human-bear interactions, and we'd like to stay ahead of that there. So what are we doing about that? One is we've been encouraging better data collection around the Arctic so that we can try to monitor potential trends up or down or stable, just see what's going on. Two is improving education around the Arctic and being more consistent in what we tell people who are living, working, or recreating in the Arctic. I would say another big part of it is convening groups so we can hear from people who are already living successfully with polar bears and share that knowledge with communities that it might be newer, or they might just have different approaches to how they deal with that. So we've been doing that through community exchanges where we're bringing people from different parts of the Arctic together to share and see bears in different contexts there. And then I would say lastly, kind of talking about different deterrent tools, what's available, and then working with researchers like Tom and his students on, are we missing tools? Are there new tools that could be developed? Are there things that are out there that just haven't been applied to conflict reduction yet?
Great. Let's talk a bit about those tools. We do have some great questions coming in. So I just want to take a moment to talk maybe about some individual tools that you would carry or that we would carry in the field, and then a couple of the community tools Churchill's using, and then we're going to get to some questions here.
Sure. So I'll start with the most basic of tools, and I think an important thing if you're living in bear country or if you're planning to recreate or visit bear country is think about what's around, what's available, what's legal, know your local laws. There are some things we might show you here may or may not be legal where you are. And then go from there and look also at what's age appropriate. So like one tool that works for everybody is something like a whistle or an air horn. Something that you would easily carry on yourself always. Something that you wouldn't hesitate to give your kid to carry. And these types of things, these noisemakers do two things. They might break off a bear's behavior if that bear is being curious, or worst case, if it's exhibiting predatory behavior. A sharp, unusual noise might be just the thing to get that bear to think twice. And so that's what we're doing. But they also draw attention to you. So it's letting everybody else around you, your hiking partners, your parents, know that you're in trouble and that you need help. And from that, we could go up to things like a handheld flare. So in the Arctic with polar bears, some of the tools that are widely available in the south aren't available in the north, and may not even be legal in some Arctic countries. But marine handheld flares are kind of ubiquitous. Most places carry these because people are out on the water in the summertime. These are nice because they're stable, they're not temperature dependent, they're waterproof, and they can also serve other purposes like fire starting. They can serve the intended purpose of being a signal flare, but they can also stand between you and a bear that's overly interested. And then lastly, I'll look at another good one that I think we all have in our closet is a flashlight. So ideally, the brightest flashlight you can find. Most of our modern flashlights have a strobe mode as well. And so predators don't like it when you take away one of their senses. So if you think of encountering a bear at night and you hit it with a bright light there, it's just going to, again, maybe break off a behavior, make that bear think twice, not sure what is going on over there, and save you some time. Lastly, if you live in North America, in the West, and are around brown bears, you've seen this, bear spray. Widely used, widely available in both Canada and the US in the West, and widely carried. Works on all bear species equally well, but not legal in all countries, and it might have restrictions in some countries as well in how to use it, and it's also can be difficult to ship. This isn't something you're going to get on a passenger airplane. It's not something a helicopter pilot's going to welcome inside the aircraft either. So you have to just look at your options.
Great. Tom, I've got a question to throw to you. So Gina B7 asks, how do people react appropriately given an actual event? So in the event of a bear attack, what would you do?
So I think the better question is let's just avoid them altogether. So I get the question, but it really is a hierarchical set of rules for bear country. Number one, you need to do the things that make it possible for bears to detect you. Having the three of us have over 90 years experience with bears, and one thing we know for sure is their main goal is to live to see another day. And so they avoid things they're not certain about, which means, number one, telegraph your presence when you're out there hiking so that you don't surprise an animal. That's the largest single category of conflict between people. You just come up on them so fast that's their evolutionary history. That's a predator, and so they can come at you with tremendous force. So you don't want to trigger that. So talking loud as a group and hiking in a group of 2 or more people, preferably 3 or more, that's the simplest thing to do to avoid an encounter. If by chance you find yourself engaged with a bear, it's aware of you, you of it, and you're close enough that each of you are cognizant of the other's actions, then you have to do the things to diffuse it, which might be simply grouping up, readying your deterrents, and simply, with determination, but not running, moving out away from the way you came, and giving the bear space. They just want space. That will diffuse most incidents. The last thing, if there were an attack, let's say we had our deterrents out and the bear decides to charge, then we know this, each of these different ones has distances, but thanks, Jeff, the bear spray is good at about 20 to 30 feet. And so at that distance, y'all talk. That's the distance at which we will discharge this. High 90% efficient, and you can rely on this. So everybody should be carrying some of or multiple deterrents. But that's what I would say. Is that answer
Yeah.
the question? Probably.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
that's great
very good.
input. Marty, I've got a question for you. Has a bear ever woken up while you were gathering data on it?
Yes. So, in a couple of contexts, a lot of our black bear work, we actually went into bear dens and immobilized the bears and handled them there. And occasionally there we had a bear arouse. In a more dangerous setting, I've had polar bears arouse early from drugging, and that's not a lot of fun. But actually, most of the time, we're handling. We learn these drugs and how they affect the animals. We learn to read the animal and how it's reacting. And if we had polar bears immobilized, we were taking what we call the vital rate, so breathing rate and heart rate and blood pressure and so on, blood oxygen concentration every 15 minutes. And so we could tell when a bear was starting to come out of the anesthetic. And so at that point, we might give the bear a small top-up dose to keep it immobilized for under the anesthetic for another 15 or 20 minutes, how much time we thought we had. So it has happened, but generally it's the kind of thing that we try to manage carefully so that it doesn't happen, because it's a potentially risky situation for both the bear and the researchers.
Yeah, absolutely. I was interested to listen to you guys talk the other night actually about tranquilizing bears and how much care you took to take care of the bears, because you do care about them. That's why we're here doing this sort of work. Jeff, I wanted to get back to you. So we talked about some individual tools that people can bring, but there's also some community level solutions that Churchill is trialing, for example. And I think we've got a couple images or videos. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what the Churchill Bear Smart Working Group is up to.
Sure. So at the community level, we look at kind of several fronts. The first thing is to do an assessment of your community from a bear safety standpoint, like what's working, what isn't, are there some gaps out there, and it runs the gamut from lighting to education to waste management. So sitting down and going through all those sectors and seeing kind of what's needed, and that's something we've done with Churchill. And we started out with simple things like making an education video, so making a bear safety video both for residents and also for visitors, so that people could understand how to be around bears in that town context there. Secondly, with the town, we looked at waste management. We know across bear species that keeping bears out of human garbage and away from human attractants is key to better management. It just creates better circumstances for everybody. And the first step in that is often dealing with residential garbage and making sure it's secure. So getting bear-resistant bins out in the community setting, making sure that's kind of tightened up. And then the last one would be the next step of that is that garbage all goes somewhere. And in the north, typically because the ground is either frozen with permafrost or it's bedrock. The idea of traditional landfills just don't work very well up here. And so landfills that are around tend to be on the surface. Waste might be buried and then fenced. If the town can afford that kind of fencing, it's quite expensive up here. And then ideally, that fence is surrounded by electric fence. So that's something we've been working with the town of Churchill to enhance the electric fencing, make it work a little bit better. So I don't know if Albert has some of that. Here we can show what the electric fencing looks like when it's on and working. We might get that. Actually, what we're seeing now is a video of what it looks like when the fence is off and not working. So you can see this bear. It's a young male, and it's up in between the electric fence and the hard fence, and it almost breaches that fence and gets into the dump. This was a power outage. We quickly figured out the problem and got the fence on. And so probably, there's a picture. It was a little bit quick, but of what it looks like when the fence is on and the bear encounters that they don't like it. They quickly learn it's there, and then what we see after bears encounter that is if they return to the landfill, they'll just kind of walk along the fence and they won't try to get in there anymore.
Right. We've talked a bit about how bears learn and their intelligence. Maybe, Tom, could you speak a bit about, do we underestimate bears' intelligence? How smart are they really?
Well, we really don't know. a lot about them other than when we see them in certain circumstances. We can make inferences about how clever they are. They're very good at problem solving. An interesting study done years ago in the National Zoo. A couple researchers took novel objects and to a wide variety of animals, including primates and ungulates and bears, monkey, all monkey, primate. But the whole thing is, they went in there and they found that the one animal, that was all three bears, they messed with objects much longer than any of the other species groups. They were more driven with curiosity and continued to try every angle. And that's what we find is a couple basic rules. I've done a lot of research in the field is you cannot hide food from a bear. They will find it. You almost can't keep them out of it except with extraordinary measures, hardened containers with tricky locks, and even now I understand Marty was saying that black bears have figured out how to get into the bear-proof. I mean, yeah, it's just a matter of time. Yeah, they turn their wrist, which for a bear is very difficult, but they do it. And so to that point, it's kind of like this with bears, and it's very right. And you can never fool them for long. So we found that the best thing is to eliminate, to the extent we can, the attractant. They're really not into just busting into houses or garbage, but if we make it attractive to them, they will. And so we have to do that. And Jeff was talking about here in Churchill, they had a very good situation where they contained all the garbage in this steel-sided building. I don't know, Jeff, what that doesn't work anymore.
Right. No, they could keep 2 to 3 years worth of kind of municipal waste in that one building, but that building burned to the ground.
Yeah.
And so they lost that functionality.
They lost that, and Jeff and I and Marty and a couple other researchers, we wrote about the problem of human waste in the Arctic and what a growing problem that is for polar bears. And we also were very careful to say, we don't want to blame these communities, many of them which were indigenous. They never had such a thing as garbage in their evolutionary history. They didn't have pits full of trash. And that was part of the culture that overtook them. And consequently then, with this kind of embarrassment of riches, bears have come into there because it beats eating nothing right now, and they've gotten involved in that, and the communities nearby, then they spin off. And anyway, my point being, we have to be one ahead of them. And Churchill did a great job, but these things are very expensive. So PBI has been working with communities to try to find innovative ways to protect that, to reduce the amount of garbage, to get more money out of recycling. It's just great to see so many different fronts that groups like Polar Bear International are doing to try to reduce conflict between people and bears. And I don't have a clue if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great.
But they're smart. That's the short answer.
And to Tom's point, the video that everybody just saw of the bear kind of wiggling in the fence, we have video of that bear being shocked earlier when the fence was on. So he knew as soon as that was off, the game was on.
Right.
And he could then go for it. So they're super smart. Like, they come back and they can sense that power is on, and as soon as it's not on, there's a problem.
And Marty, you have a great story about a bear generalizing experiences when it comes to food. Maybe you could share that one with the white box.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is a black bear story, but many years ago, a study I had in Algonquin Park in Ontario, there was a lake that had a number of cottages on it, and during the week one time when most cottagers were away, because it was during the week, they were back home, a big male bear broke into the porch of a cottage, and there was a big white refrigerator, and it managed to open the refrigerator and got steaks and hot dogs and whatever other kinds of rewards. Then it moved on to the next cottage and went in. Oh, there's another big white object on the porch, and it opened that and got in there as well. And then the third cottage, it went. There was no fridge on the porch, but it looked through the window, and there was a big white object inside. So it broke through the window, and so there was a bear that was generalizing from one situation where it got a reward to an expectation that, well, if I do the same thing, I'll also get another reward, and then to the third situation where it adapted its behavior or whatever to continue getting rewards. So yeah.
Very, very smart animals.
I was going to add
Yeah,
one other thing. You know,
please.
Marty, myself, Jeff as well, we've all captured bears. And so in some of these cases, we use electric fencing around things we want to protect. And we had bears in Utah that were pushing trees down to push the wires down on the ground so they could walk through. I mean, they're tool users. They've got a lot of tricks up their sleeve. So, you know, it's kept groups like Marty, me, and Jeff all busy our whole career trying to find ways to keep them from getting entangled in human food, human developments, and all things that end poorly for the bear. So, yeah, they're bright.
So I've got a question here. I'll throw it to Jeff, but everyone is free to chime in. With the changing climate, has there been a noted increase or decrease in attacks on humans from polar bears? Or we could even talk other bears too.
So we tried to look at that. All three of us were members of the Polar Bear Range States Conflict Working Group when that was active, and that was one of the remits, was to look at that exact question. And there was a sense at the time that we did that work that conflicts were on the rise, negative interactions were on the rise, but we were somewhat stymied because data collection around the Arctic was inconsistent, and data sharing around the Arctic remains a problem today between jurisdictions. But definitely concern, looking at it at the time we did that paper, that we were likely to see more negative interactions, potentially worse outcomes.
Right. Working to be proactive. Marty, I'll start with you on this one. So we've got a question from Glenn. So Glenn read an article from maybe Svalbard about people being interested in developing some artificial floating platforms to help the seals and the bears. Is anything like that happening in the Canadian Arctic and Hudson Bay?
Nothing like that is happening, and I suppose we really have to ask ourselves, is that a reasonable solution? And my opinion is no, it's not a reasonable solution. Jeff, do you want to chime in?
No, definitely. Like when you look at the scale of the Arctic, just for starters, it's just too big. We're not going to get there. And then, as we all know, sea ice is so much more than a platform. It's not just a floating dock. It's actually the substrate of the Arctic ecosystem. Underneath that sea ice, that we have algae growing, being grazed on by copepods and isopods that are grazed on by Arctic cod, ultimately seals, and ultimately polar bears. So if you replace that with floating styrofoam, it's not going to function in the same way.
Right. There was a study a year or two ago that showed, was it about 86% of the carbon in a polar bear's body can get traced back to sea ice algae? So if you take that away, where does the polar bear come from? Yeah.
And I mean, really, too, we have some great minds out there that are thinking about some of these solutions.
Yes.
It'd be awesome if we all work together on what we know the problem is, which is burning too much carbon fuels for energy.
Right.
And the risk of relying on geoengineering, various schemes that people have come up with for geoengineering, is that in the meantime we do nothing about mitigating our CO2 production. And so maybe you've got some geoengineering idea that might work passably well in the short term, but at the end of that we're worse off because CO2 emissions have continued to rise.
Right, would be well served to just tackle the known issue and use the known solutions, roll them out bigger. So I'm going to ask you a question, Tom, because I think this audience will be really interested to talk about dogs. We have a lot of dog lovers at Explore.org. We have a lot of bear lovers at Explore.org. And many of these folks might like to spend time in the outdoors with their dogs. And sometimes we get a sense, too, that dogs can or will protect us against any bears in the woods. And maybe you could kind of expand on your recent work on that.
Sure. Dogs have been our best friend forever, and people love to take them into the wilderness or even on walks. And yet the idea behind that was that this dog is going to have early detection capability. Of course they do. They're much more sensitive to scent, and their hearing's quite good. So that's not a bad hoped-for outcome, but our data shows that it hasn't played out quite that way. And to be clear, we're talking domestic pets, not trained bear dogs. And we're not even talking trained dogs. And Marty talked about this the other day. If you have a very well-trained dog that listens to you on command, and under all circumstances, kind of like a police dog. That's a great dog for bear country. The problem is 99% of the dogs or more that people take out are not those dogs. So we're talking about my dogs, the ones I have at home, just fun little fluffy dogs that love to run around and just be out there. The problem, as you might imagine, is if you have them off leash, let's look at that, they're racing ahead on the trail. That's what mine do. I'm not in a bear area, by the way, so it's okay. But even then I have collars on them so that I can beep it and call them back, because I don't want them chasing birds. We have wild turkeys. I don't want them chasing deer. I want them to leave nature alone, but enjoy it, which is asking a lot of a dog, but you can get them to. Anyway, when they're off leash, the problem is they'll race out there, and we had quite a number of incidents where they interact with the bear, and then the bear being agitated, maybe there's cubs, they race back with the dog, and now the owner's got, a 350-pound problem on their hand. So those have not ended well. That dogs would give early warning. In 70% of the cases, they did not do that. Worse, when the bear has actually physically attacked the human, dogs, unfortunately, I think it was 75% of the cases, they left the scene, which is really heartbreaking, because my little dog, I'd like to believe it's never going to do that, but well, maybe he's in the 25% that didn't. But of those that didn't, 18% of those sat on the side and kind of watched the mauling. I don't think they did it for fun. I think they're pretty smart when they see a huge animal that there's no way in the world they can do anything with. They don't engage. I like to think they're over there crying, but I don't know. I've never seen dog tears. But anyway, the other thing is, so they sit and watch, and then in the remainder, guess what they did? They split. They said, there's enough of this. So it was kind of a sad memo I had to write to dog owners. Now that's off leash, and well, that was all dogs in common, but let's get to the things that do matter. We're going to take our dogs. They need to be on a leash so that we can control them. At the very least, if they're off leash, they need to be dogs that you keep an eye on and you control. We did find that those people in bear country that carried a deterrent, like one of these Jeff talks about, those were game changers. Those people happened to fare well because they could actually defend themselves. And that was very important finding. So if you're going to be out there, leash them if at all possible, carry a bear deterrent with you. And the other thing that was really interesting, I didn't talk about the other day, but most of these incidents happen in what we call front country. So like if you're in Lake Tahoe, Incline Village, this is built right there in bear habitat. That, where you're walking in semi-residential areas, that's where most of the bear incidents have occurred. Jackson, Wyoming, Aspen, Colorado, Vail. We can go down the list where people live in nature. That's where most of these happen. So there's really nowhere you can just take a casual stroll with your dog because you see houses. If it's bear country, you better be ready for it. So that was a few of the findings. I don't know if we hit the key ones, but
I think that's interesting. I think it's good for people to know.
I think it's important.
Yeah, I do think it's important. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back a bit to the individual tools again and talk about how there are opportunities to develop new tools. And maybe Jeff will start with you, but we can kick it to whoever too. How do we go about thinking about what new tools we might need and testing what might work?
Yeah, part of it is getting together with other bear and other wildlife people, wildlife involved in conflict, and just seeing what are people using for solutions. And like thinking back early on, in some areas they were using strobe lights for fox to protect areas where there's sheep herding going on and things like that, and trying to scale that up and say, well, if it works on fox, would it work on bears or polar bears? Same thing, I think the first time I heard anybody talk about using drones, it was for elephant conflict in Africa. And to them, they just thought it sounded like bees, which they're terribly afraid of, and it seemed to be effective in moving elephants around the landscape to some extent there. And so, yeah, just kind of thinking broadly, like what's out there, what might we port over, and then what partnerships can we have? And in our case, partnering with an academic partner like Brigham Young University, and turning it over to Tom's team to say, hey, what do you got?
What do you got, Tom?
Well, so Jeff pointed it out, and Marty has said as much, is in our careers, we read widely, and we'll see something, technology used on elephants, let's say, and like you said, is there some transferability to the bear world? So we looked at that. I studied 2,000 to 3,000 human-bear conflicts, and occasionally somebody do something kind of novel, and it would seem to work. So we go, maybe that's something we need to look at. One of the cases was in Alaska, a guy or several people would, they'd be hunting and they'd kill, let's say, a big animal, a moose, and they put a strobe light on top of the carcass, and they would claim that flashing held bears at bay. Well, we want to check that out because that's an easy thing. It's non-lethal, and it's just one more little thing that might help people stay safe. So you look at things like that. We picked a few up there. We also have looked at new innovative, materials like, there's fabrics now that are electrically conductive, and we've been trying those out for, instead of electric fences, which are wonderful, but they're nuanced. I've set them up for years, and I'm always not amazed or disappointed, but people have a hard time with electricity. I mean, it just comes out of the wall and it runs things. But when it gets down to having to implement a circuit yourself, for some people, they're just not trained in it, so they would not do it right. But so we're trying to get around the electric fence and find other ways to protect tents, kayaks, inflatables, food. And I think with partnering with PBI, we're making some very good inroads there. We also are messing with sound. I had done some experiments years ago with sound, and it turns out that there are frequencies bears really don't like. And so, it doesn't hurt them, but we can push them out of an area or even warn that we're coming. These are advances. These are things that will help. And the last thing, what's that?
Oh, drones.
Oh, drones, yeah. Jeff and I and my student Kyle were at a conference, and we saw this one guy, Wesley Sarmento, was herding bears away from farms, ranches in Montana with drones. And Jeff came to us and said, would you guys be interested in trying this? This looks good. And so we've run drones with pullers and with brown bears now. And the idea was, well, maybe they'll stand up on their hind legs and just swat at them, or maybe they'll just sit there and ignore them. But they haven't. It's been very effective in pushing bears out of places. And I've had a couple people say, well, that seems harassment. And I said, you've got to get the big picture here. We're looking at bears that are in a residential area. They're going to get shot. So you need to keep that in mind. Yes, it's stressing them, but that's a lot better than lead. So, you have to get the big picture, and we're finding it as one more tool. Another thing in Europe, where I was living last 2 years ago, in Italy, Central Europe, Slovenia, Poland, Spain, all those, Croatia, this tool, which has proven to be very effective here, it's illegal. You can't use it. You can't carry it, nor can you carry a gun. Now, you can carry these things that Jeff pointed out, the whistle. These are great ideas, but it hasn't caught on, and people are feeling very vulnerable. Well, we want to see brown bears restored to the Alps, but when people have no way to defend themselves, you're up against a very hard stop there. So we've been reformulating, again, with PBI bear sprays that will disable the bear but not people. And I think we're making good progress there too. So that's a few of the things we've been doing. I'm sure there's some other great ideas out there, but so far that's keeping us pretty busy, those four.
Yeah, when we're talking about some of these deterrent tools, and especially the deterrent testing, I think it's important to remember that we're talking from a management standpoint. Mm-hmm. So it's using tools to keep bears and people safe, to keep bears and people separate. We're not doing this for recreation. Mm-hmm. We're not doing this for profit. We're doing this for safety.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a great clarification. And there is a difference between these different levels of tools, who's using what types of tools, and then a big thing that we invest in is education and education tools. And Jeff did touch on this before. If Albert's running the show, Albert, if you could cue up the example of Yep, the kids video there. So the Churchill Bear Smart Working Group wanted a better safety video for folks that are visiting Churchill and some that live here as well, but reminding people to be respectful of the bears. Education comes in a variety of ways, and these days there's a lot of videos. So here's a short clip from some of the videos we worked on.
How fast do you think you are? Have you won any medals recently? The average person can run about 8 kilometers an hour. But a polar bear can run faster than an Olympic athlete, more than 40 kilometers an hour. So you do the math and never approach a polar bear.
I love that. It was so great to have local kids help us make that little video. Super fun. Marty, I wanted to ask you about your experience. You working with education initiatives in Ontario, and you were a big proponent of wanting to talk to kids and adults about bear safety, and maybe you could speak from that perspective a bit.
Yeah, in Ontario, it's going back quite a while now. We had a really well-funded program called BearWise that started in 2004. And during the many years of that project, we developed many curriculum aids for grade 2, 5, and 8, I believe, if I remember correctly. These went out to schools across the province. We provided training for teachers as well, if they were interested. So yeah, a huge effort back in the day of helping educate students, especially at the elementary school level, to understand bear behavior better, and also to get a fully understanding of the causes of human-bear conflict.
Right, so important. Okay, so if you have any last questions, please do send them our way. We're going to start wrapping up, but I've got a couple more questions here. Tom, I'm going to throw you one. It's a little bit of a silly one, but I know you'll do a great job answering it. So you spoke at the very beginning about kind of the evolutionary history of these bears and how that kind of can inform behavior and maybe how we would react to those bears. What would you do if you had a hybrid bear? What about a growler bear? Would there be any differences in how you would react to a growler bear, or would you expect a growler bear to act differently to a human?
So that, I mean, it's not silly. I think that one thing that people saw when they found the first hybrids between polars and brown bears is their claws were halfway between. Polar bears have a very specialized claw for catching seals, brown bears for digging, and it was right in the middle. And we know that behavior has a very strong, genetic component. So you've got a bear that's aggressive and charges, and a bear that's much more reluctant with people. So you could guess it would tend towards the more aggressive side. So I guess but I would do it all the same. It's all the same in that what we want to do is make sure we don't surprise any. We always have our bear spray or other deterrents with us. As I've said before, I think it's irresponsible to go into bear country. I think as humans, I don't know, I'd like to say the smarter species, it's incumbent on us to take the upper hand here and not put ourselves in positions that are at risk, nor to put bears at risk. And so we have to have a way to tell them no with any bear. So you're going to have that deterrent, and that'll work on a polar bear or a brown bear, so it works on their little relative or their descendants as well. So not a bad question, actually. I like that one.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to start to wrap up by asking you guys a similar question to something I asked the other night. Is the roles that different entities can play when it comes to bear coexistence, bear conservation, and we all work together, but you kind of have different backgrounds. So whether university, nonprofit, or government, and also as a retired scientist, like the different roles and voices you can have. Marty, would you want to start with that?
Yeah, in government, you have the interplay between, depending on the government, of course, but many governments have their own research group. And so you get the interplay between what the research people are producing or what they are learning from colleagues and collaborators, and the policy people who are putting forward perhaps changes in legislation or what have you. The policy people really are the bridge between the researchers, the science people, and the politicians. And the job of the policy people is to understand the science that's produced and then translate that to the politicians, because they generally are not going to have often not going to have a science background. So it can be complicated, and the politicians, of course, may have an agenda. They may well have changes that they want to see, so that it's up to the policy people to inform the politicians whether the changes they want to see are actually supported by the science that's available. So it can be tricky.
Right, that is tricky and very important. What can a nonprofit do to support conservation?
Sure. So a big part of what we do is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
It's education and outreach. It's talking about it, getting messages out to the public and out to policymakers. I think a big role we play too is to convene, connect, and support. And we do this through things like, supporting bringing professional bear practitioners together at places like the International Human Bear Conflict Workshop, through convening communities, through community exchange programs. And then we also have a role in supporting research and conducting some research both on existing deterrents, are they as effective as we think, and also looking at new deterrents with partners like academic partners, Brigham Young University.
Right, yeah. And Tom, what are universities doing? All sorts of stuff.
So I think an important point, and I know everybody here understands this, as a researcher, we have an obligation to help the public understand what it is we're doing. Because let's say most of my publications are in, Journal of Wildlife Management, the journal Ursus, and things like that. Not periodicals read by most everybody. Very few people. They're for professionals, but groups like PBI, and then when Dr. Obard Marty worked for the province, we're not really disseminators of the knowledge that way, but they're very skilled at doing that. So Jeff works directly with teams of people, like that wonderful little film there with those kids. I mean, that's just amazing. It was very well done. And so same with Marty. He would try to convey, because he's a researcher, he would get his research to the government, and they have their own people then that are trained in how to get it out to the public, that kind of thing. And if you think about it, I might have a couple hundred people read a paper, but in one day at a zoo, thousands of people go through there. So I know PBI's worked with zoos so that they get the message right, and then other media. So we really have to partner with people who have mouthpieces that are effective, or it really just becomes, we have a saying, it becomes another brick in the temple of science that lies around the brickyard, wholly unused. So we really like to partner with these guys, because that's what conservation is. It's all these parts, and we all have our strengths, but we have to recognize where we're not capable as these other groups. So we're more than glad to turn those results over to the NGO like PBI, and in Marty's case, where he worked for the province, it would go to your people information resources, and they get that out in a way that people, with everything from stickers to signs to, spots on the media, all the things they do. So it's a group effort.
Absolutely, yeah, it is a group effort. And the bear world is not that big. So a lot of people know each other, meet each other at these conferences and workshops, get together, get new ideas, learn from each other, and work toward conserving bears and supporting people in living with bears. And it takes all sorts of different folks all around the world to do it. And we're really lucky to be part of this world. And thank you for being interested in this world as well. Thank you for watching the Explore.org cams. Huge thanks to Frontiers North Adventures. We're so happy to be live streaming from EV Tundra Buggy 1 out on the Tundra this year. It is a beautiful experience. It's been pretty nice roaming around quietly watching these bears. We will continue to live stream polar bears through the rest of the day and through next week. Our next live chat is next Wednesday. We will be wrapping up the season. If you have any art, if you want to share your favorite clips or moments from the year, please send them in to us. You can put them in the Explore.org chat, or again, email questions@pbears.org. We want that last live chat of our polar bear season to just really celebrate the year and the viewers. And congrats to all those of you that did the scavenger hunt. I think there were some just really wonderful snapshots, and there are some winners out there. So we really appreciate it. We're having a lot of fun. And thank you to Polar Bears International. Thank you to our panelists today. I think that was a lot of wonderful content. And we will see everybody around. We're going to play one last video for you, and we'll see you out there soon. Keep an eye out for those bears. Thanks.
Future generations of people and polar bears depend on the decisions and plans that we make today. A polar bear's life cycle is almost exclusively tied to the sea ice. Because polar bears rely on sea ice to hunt, to breed, and sometimes to den, sea ice loss from climate change is their biggest threat, and the reason the bears are listed as vulnerable on the IUCN's Red List of Threatened Species. What we learn about climate change impacts on polar bears in Hudson Bay can be applied across the Arctic to help conserve other populations. Climate change is already affecting some populations of polar bears. Since we get most of our energy from fossil fuels, we are producing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. You see, regular amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere act like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and keeping our planet at a stable temperature. However, when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas for energy, we pump rampant amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This buildup thickens the blanket, trapping too much heat, disrupting the climate, and melting Arctic sea ice. When Arctic waters are cold enough, the top layer freezes into a special type of ice called sea ice. Sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. It supports the entire Arctic food chain. Food from this marine ecosystem also sustains northern communities. The key to getting the climate back to functioning the way it should, and to preserving a future for polar bears across the Arctic, is to move away from using fossil fuels for energy altogether. The most important thing we can do is vote with the climate in mind to let our leaders know we support a swift transition to renewable energy sources. In the meantime, we can directly participate in and learn more about our local and regional renewable energy options. We can all make a difference outside our own households by influencing where our energy comes from. Because together, we can make sure that polar bears roam the Arctic sea ice for generations to come.